please help me welcome my friend, Mike Harrell.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Colleen. I love coming to the Smokies in October. So thank you for having it in October with all the beautiful fall colors. That's nice. So I want you to keep in mind the name of this talk. Now, what Colleen mentioned, that when you think of safety, you think of how do you lift a patient, right? That's what you think of? Now, I like audiences that talk to me, so talk to me. Because I can't see y'all, so I have to have y'all talk to me. Okay, so that's what you think of. But today we're going to talk about communication, the essential link in the patient safety network. Now, is that what you would typically think of with safety, patient safety? No. So maybe I'll keep your interest for the next hour, I hope. I am currently, though I am semi-retired, I am still the Director of Clinical Education Respiratory for PASI-MUIR. So any references that I will be making to the speaking valve, which will be slight, only in one section, everything about a speaking valve will relate to the PASI-MUIR valve, because the PASI-MUIR valve is the only one that's been designed and has the FDA indications for ventilator use. Also, if you noticed, I started in respiratory in 1974. So next year will be my big 5-0 in respiratory. Hopefully during the talk, what we're going to cover will mean something to each one of you. Some of what we talk about will pertain a little bit more to management because it's things you have to do from a management end. But most of it will have to do with clinicians who work at the bedside, in the home, in whatever healthcare environment you're in. We're going to be talking about things that will make a difference to you. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish, that when you leave here, you will have some things you can actually do to improve your communication with patients and improve patient safety. So what is communication? That seems pretty simple, doesn't it? Communication is the sharing of information, thoughts, and emotions using speech or other means. Pretty obvious, right? Pretty simple, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but it doesn't always work out so well, you know. We can have successful or unsuccessful communication. And that's where it gets sticky, and that's what our talk is about today. So, how many of you have a story where you have run across communication problems in whatever environment you work in that's caused a problem with caring for your patient? Just say yes or no or something. So you're pretty, that's pretty ubiquitous, right? I love that word, ubiquitous. So it's not uncommon. I just want to share a brief story that happened to me when I first entered into respiratory, and I just started taking care of ventilator patients. I worked at Washington Adventist Hospital in the DC area. I was taking care of a woman who had Guillain-Barré, and I still remember her name, but I won't tell you. She was on the ventilator in the hospital for 6 months. Now, how many of you will keep a ventilator patient for 6 months in an acute care facility now? Well, remember, this was back in 1976, okay? So, 6 months, it came to the point where she could only blink, if that. We finally got her weaned off the ventilator. She went up to Reading Rehab up in Pennsylvania. She came back to visit us at the hospital, and I remember stopping in the hallway and talking to her. She was so happy to be back on her feet, and she appreciated so much what we had done for her, but she had one thing to say to me. She said, "Please share with everyone how frightening and frustrated it was for me, for you all to talk about me, over me, as if I didn't exist. That stuck with me for the rest of my professional career, and it has shaped my attitude toward communication with patients ever since. So, what are some problems? If I'm saying this is the essential link in patient safety, what happens when our communications fail with our patients? This is a list of a few of the consequences of failure to communicate that comes from the Joint Commission, actually. And you can look at them. Missed treatments, delayed treatments, patient falls, incorrect medications given, incorrect diagnosis, patient elopement, all kinds of things happen. These are direct results of improper and failed, unsuccessful communication. So what is effective communication, and how do you know that your communication has been effective? How can you measure it? Well, effective communication means, first of all, that what you're communicating to someone else is being truly understood. Second, that the person you're communicating with can take appropriate actions based on what you're saying, and that gives you a measurable aspect. And it also means that you can understand and take appropriate actions based on what is being communicated to you. So those are important issues in patient communication. I say essential link, communication. Joint Commission agrees. They say that it's a significant contributor to patient events, negative patient events. And do you see the statistic? 70% of patient accidents and patient problems are related to unsuccessful communication. Is that pretty impressive? It means that successful communication is important. But just talking about successful and unsuccessful communication, looking at communication in general as a general topic, is not really going to be very useful. We need to be specific, find specific areas that we need to consider, and find solutions for those specific problems. We're going to try and talk about a few of those specific problems today. First of all, where in the healthcare system can communication break down? It can break down between each professional, nurse to nurse, nurse to therapist, therapist to physician, therapist to therapist. It can break down there. It can break down in your communication as a professional to your patients. Or it can break down in your patient's communication back to you. And remember, this includes also the patient's family also. So there's three primary areas of concern. We need to just look quickly. We're not going to spend much time on this, but patient handover is important. And it's important for you to think about this, because how many of you give report after your 12-hour shift, someone else takes over? Say yes. Okay, because I don't know how many of you are acute or working in places where you're actually clinical. So that is a point where communication can break down. There was a survey done by the Healthcare Quality Review Commission, which is a big deal, of 500,000 nurses working in 1,000 hospitals. And in that survey, 50% of the nurses knew that information was either missed or incorrectly provided during patient handovers. That should make us really concerned. This is just a quick list. I'm not going to spend any time on it. I just want you to take a quick list, look at this so that you know there are systems that can help improve that handover time period. That SBAR and AIDET, those are systems that you can use that are actually planned out systems. And there are online programs for training. And you, in your individual units, need to think about your handover communications and how you make them thorough and successful. You need to think about that specifically and design a specific program to do that. Or else you will be unsuccessful and you'll be part of that. You'll be contributing to part of that 70% that contributes to errors. We are going to focus today now on 4 areas that are kind of commonly overlooked. Like I said, we really can't focus on a lot of things, but we can focus on 4 things that are commonly overlooked. They are 4 places in which patients and coworkers can be placed at disadvantage when communication is essential as it is in a hospital. Those areas are limited English proficiency, hearing deficits, intubated and tracheostomized patients, and patients with developmental disabilities. So, limited English proficiency. We're going to start there. This is going to be just short. Limited English proficiency is not where we're going to focus too much energy on, but it provides a good basis for where we're going. First of all, 78% of American households speak English. But there are 42 different languages spoken in the United States of America. 7 of those languages have at least 1 million speakers in that language group. 22% of households in America have someone in them who does not speak English. Now, this could be a political football, right? We all want to talk about how we either love or we dislike immigrants. We have all these problems with our none of that matters. You're a healthcare worker. Part of these people are going to come to receive care by you. You are responsible for communicating with them. So it does not matter what you think in terms of our policies and who should be here and should they be able to speak English and all of that. We are responsible for communicating with those people. So just a quick view of how can that be done. And this is kind of a hospital overview or a home care overview or a skilled nursing facility overview. First of all, you need to collect accurate information when the patient is admitted into the services. You need to know what language they speak. Then, appropriate language services need to be provided. That could be, and most typically is most effectively done, by providing medically experienced language interpreters. That works the best. That is the gold standard. There are some other avenues you can take if that is absolutely not available, but that is the best. Then you need to document those services and what you're using when you communicate with the patient. That needs to be in the chart. So those things are important. Some of this is going to be fleshed out as we go on to some of our other topics, but that's dealing with language and English proficiency. Now, 9 to 10% of Americans have some level of hearing loss. How many of you have what I have here, hearing aids? Anybody else? So, 9 to 10% of Americans have some level of hearing loss. Now, to say that, deaf and hard of hearing is a big, wide group of people. Deaf, with a capital D, is referring to the deaf community, people who really don't hear, who consider themselves a part of a particular minority community, and typically use sign language. But lowercase d in hard of hearing can be people who just have significant hearing loss, who do not consider themselves in that subset, and who may not be a part of that community. So what I am saying is there is a wide variety of needs that these patients have, and we need to consider them as we're talking about communicating with them. We're going to talk a little bit about people who are deaf first. And this was a study that was done on 95 individuals who were deaf and their approach to health care. The problems that they had with health care were, and here's this word I love, ubiquitous. That means that everywhere they had problems in accessing health care because they were deaf and they couldn't hear the communications that were being given to them. And our healthcare system is not well equipped to address that problem. So can you imagine yourself what it's like to approach a healthcare, to approach your doctor, to be brought into an ER, and you cannot hear what they're saying, you can't communicate, and you have no idea? Can you picture the problems that that's going to cause? Yes? If things worked well, it was typically related to the use of a medically experienced sign language interpreter. The deaf community with a capital D typically uses sign language. And that is their first language, and that's the language they know. So, every now and then we're going to run across a slide like this one that says steps in doing this or steps in doing that. This is where I'm giving you some things to actually do, okay? If you have a pen, you want to write them down. Okay, I know I'm not going to necessarily go right down the list and give them to you. You can read the list. But, first of all, for a person who is deaf, and this is capital D, deaf, do not assume the person uses can lip read. Find out what kind of method of communication they prefer. Ask them or someone with them. Get the information. What kind of language do they use? How are you going to be able to communicate with them? Use a medically experienced sign language interpreter. Do not depend on their family. Do you know why? Have any idea why not? You're going to be using some terms that their family members may not understand. You're going to be using some references to situations that will not make sense to their family. Therefore, what you say to the interpreter may not be appropriately communicated to the patient. So you need a medically experienced sign language interpreter. Your facility needs to be able to provide that level of interpretation to the deaf people who come to your services. That is really important. If you don't want to have medical problems, that's important. Always verify that what you have communicated is understood. And you can use some technologies. There are some translations on cell phones and the like that can help. Those are generally not preferred by deaf people and may be misunderstood. But if you don't have access to other things, that may be something you'll have to use. So this is slide 1 with tips that you can use in what you do on a daily basis with your patients. Now, I mentioned lip reading. Can people who are deaf read lips? What do you think? Yes, no? Well, I got a mix of answers, and that's because there's a mix of truth. Some do better than others. Some do lousy. Some do well. But the best is 35% of what you said is understood by the person who is deaf. Often, they will give you the idea that they actually understand, even though they do not. I have experience with that. They will let you believe that they understand when they didn't. So you've got to verify it. So do not depend on lip reading. Always make sure, if you are using lip reading, that you have other methods that you're using together with it. Don't depend on that as your only method of communicating with a deaf person. So, when you use a sign language interpreter, there are some important things to remember. And again, these are important things to remember if you're going to use a sign language interpreter. I'm trying to give you some real, honest-to-goodness, good information. First of all, when you're using a sign language interpreter, look directly at your patient, not at the sign language interpreter. Also, speak directly to the patient with no reference to the interpreter. Don't say, please tell John I need blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Talk directly to the patient. The sign language interpreter will interpret what you're saying. And that's the appropriate way to do it. You need to be sure that if there's specific information you want that interpreter to understand before he interprets, tell him that before he starts interpreting. Do not say anything that you do not want the sign language interpreter to interpret. He is going to interpret everything you say, whether you like it or not. So do not say anything, don't say aside to someone else who's in the room, blah, 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 about it. He's going to interpret that to the patient. So remember that. That's important. And again, always verify what you want to communicate is understood. And that's easier when you're going through an interpreter, because you can ask the interpreter to ask the patient questions and get feedback. Now, written communications with a deaf or a deaf and hard of hearing. Why is that not the recommended way? First of all, truly deaf with a capital D don't like it because that is not their language. They do not speak English. I'll give you just a little example. I would say, I'm going to the store, right? Sign language for that is, which means store go I. They do not use all those other words in between that we do. Their order is different. They frame things differently. So what you write down is very likely not to be understood by the deaf person, and what they write down back to you, you will very miseasily misunderstand. And even hard of hearing people can have the same issue with writing. So do not depend on writing as your only method of communicating with the deaf and hard of hearing. Here is just one actual real-life story. Mr. Abernathy came into a hospital. He was deaf. He requested that they provide a sign language interpreter. The hospital chose not to do so. They chose to make him write to them, and they wrote back to him. Things went wrong at the hospital. Mr. Abernathy sued the hospital. Mr. Abernathy won the case because, according to the ADA, the hospital was required to provide an effective method of communication, and this was not viewed as an effective method of communication for Mr. Abernathy. So, it's important. This really makes a difference in real life. Speech is the most effective way that we communicate. To use writing, language boards, electronic communication devices is not our natural way of communicating. It means there is frustration and inaccuracy, and in the electronic devices there is possibilities of breakage, and there is likelihood of misunderstanding. So speech is the best. Obviously, there are times when there is no alternative but to turn to the other options. But speech is the best. Deaf or hard of hearing. You'll see this is similar list to the last one we had with the capital D, right? This is lowercase d. But this adds a couple of things to it. Again, you want to ask the patient, you want to provide the appropriate level of sign language interpretation. You want to always talk directly to the patient, all of those things that are important. You also can sometimes use different kinds of electronic devices. You can use writing, but always use more than one level if you're going with those routes. Use more than one type of communication, that's important. Also, verify what you're communicating is being understood. Am I repeating myself? Yes. You know why? It's important. Now, here's a technology thing, all right? I'm going to play a video, but I'm going to need help because this thing does not transfer from playing for me and playing for you well.
Underline communication and safety, underline final,
As you
underline
can
KK,
tell,
underline
right?
10.2023 protected
Well,
view
let's
dash
see
PowerPoint
now.
presenter view, presenter
Maybe
view
it will
slide.
go ahead. I'm going to click this video. This is a demonstration. We're moving now into intubated and tracheostomized patients. This is a demonstration of why these kind of communication devices can be problematic for this group.
Space.
No. Stop row. No. After J. Change row. Change your T. Got T.
You can tell they're trying to communicate and being pretty unsuccessful.
S.
Using a communication board, going down through the alphabet, it's just not working.
Let's go. F. G. H. I.
So, that's just a demonstration. Don't you like that little extra click you hear? Like I say, technology is wonderful, but sometimes it's complicated. So, we're dealing, how often do you deal with tracheostomized and intubated patients who can't talk to you? Kind of a lot, right? We're respiratory therapists, right? I spent 50 years dealing with these people.
Space.
Oh, it's not going to go back to my... Okay. All right. First of all, you are ethically bound as respiratory therapists by your code of ethics in the AARC to conduct ethical care, and safety is a part of that ethical care, which means you need to develop ways of communicating with your patients. Are we moving slides? I'm not hearing my slides here now. It doesn't like me anymore. Huh. Yeah, it's not telling me the slide titles now. That's right. We'll get there. I know that the slide is up there right now, though. Says that the ADA requires that all services provided by the hospital, that includes respiratory services, are legally bound to provide effective methods of communication. That means at home, that means in a LTAC, that means in a SNF, that means in an acute care facility. You are legally bound to provide effective communication, including your ventilator patients. So let's see if we can hear what's going on. Nope. Nope. There's one way I know I can do it. So just, if you don't mind my taking a second here, and it'll take me just a second. Let's see, we'll get here. I'm going to have to. There we go. There. Okay, that was my ADA slide. When you're dealing with a patient who has a tracheostomy, who's on the ventilator, you have a few options for what you're going to do in terms of communication. Blinking is one of them. How many of you have ever tried blinking with your patients, once for yes and twice for no? Yes? Okay. Lip reading. We'll talk more about that. How many of you tried to lip read your patients? Well, if they're intubated, that doesn't work so well, does it? But even your trach patients, not so good. But anyway, there's communications boards, there's electronic communications devices, and then there is speech. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of these. And Colleen, how am I doing as far as time? Okay.
15, you're good.
50, okay, all right, we're going to keep going here. Now, here's a video, but I think I'm going to skip this video because I don't want to cause any more trouble. But I can. You see this person up there? He was from the Swiss video people, from the Swiss Paraplegic Society over in Switzerland. And he was explaining that he just gave up communicating when they were trying to use the blinking system because it was too slow, it was too cumbersome, awkward, and he just didn't want to do it. So that's not a good method of communicating. Now, I'm going to play a little quick video here, and I want you to watch it and see if you can tell me what she says. You see her lips move? There. Now, did you see that? Okay, do you have any idea what she did? what she said? You want me to go back and try again? Now, is that the right slide? Is she? Okay. So, what did she say? Well, I'll tell you. And again, that was another video, but it'll just screw us up if I play it. She said, I am a diabetic. So, here's a little statistic for you. For us people who have typical hearing, the best we ever do, and this is according to an actual, real, very thorough study, is we get 12.4% of what's on the lips, at best. So what does that tell you about lip reading? Okay, here's a quick example. There was a gentleman in the ICU. He was a very ill patient, COPD, really end stage. He was on the ventilator. He was asked, do you want us to take the ventilator off? They lip read and thought he said yes. The nurse, fortunately, remembered that he had a Passimir valve in his drawer in the office. He went and got the valve. The respiratory therapist put it in line, and they asked the question again. And the patient said, I want to stay on the ventilator. So had they not used the valve, they would have taken him off the ventilator and he would have died. Is that a safety issue? Yes. So, I think this is another video, and I'm afraid to try it, but let's see. Well, nope. So, oh yes, I know what that one was. Anyway, we're going to move here quickly. Safety is important. Here's another just quick little story. This was a man who was on a ventilator, seriously ill, had serious pneumonia. He was on very high-powered antibiotics on the ventilator, was in a coma, intentionally a medication coma. He had a very serious rash on his abdomen, and the doctors came in and saw it and thought, is he having a reaction to these high-powered antibiotics? So the doctor was trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Do we have to take him off the high-powered antibiotics? What are we going to do? Fortunately, he had a valve, so they brought him out of the coma, got the valve, put the valve in line, and asked the patient about the rash. He says, I have serious psoriasis. This is nothing but psoriasis. So they could put him back in the coma, put him, leave the antibiotics going, and he did survive. So that made a difference in how he was treated, right? Now this is a video, I think I'm going to skip them just because we don't have a lot of time and I don't trust the videos right now. But this is a video showing a placement of a valve. It is kind of giving you an idea of how that valve placement goes and just a quick step through with placing it. The intention is not to teach you how to place the valve, but just so that you will know that valves do work with ventilators and they do work well, and they can provide the communication that is so necessary to our patients. And that's just another video with, her name was, we called her Gabby because she talked so much. She was on the ventilator talking, But the valve can be very successfully used if you know the proper selection criteria, if you know how to place the valve. There's lots of education that goes into it, but it can be very successfully and very safely used and can be the most successful way to communicate with your ventilator patients. Now, we're going to go through developmental disabilities because I think this is really important. I'm going to try and be quick, Colleen. Okay. So, what is a developmental disability? Everybody has their own ideas of what a developmental disability is, I think. But a developmental disability has a definition officially, and it is that is a serious condition that is present at birth or comes during childhood, is ongoing, and seriously impacts several aspects of the activities of daily living. And those are things like speaking, learning, walking, seeing, writing, reading, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what a developmental disability means. And what are some examples? Autism. You've got lots of examples. My brain went dead. I was trying to remember what my little granddaughter has. She has Down syndrome. So this is a dear one to me. She's doing very well, but she has Down syndrome. Spina bifida, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. All of those are just examples of different kinds of developmental disabilities. How many people in this state, in the state of Tennessee, 2.3% of this population has a developmental disability. That means 160,000 people in this state have a developmental disability, which means you are going to be caring for people with developmental disabilities, right? So, why does that impact communication? Well, here was just a little quick survey done of physicians to see how they deal with communicating with people with developmental disabilities. Well, there was really 3 primary problems there. First of all, they didn't want to talk to the patient. They didn't want to give them the information that was necessary because they didn't believe they would understand it. And they preferred to talk to their caregiver. Let me tell you something. When I go, you know, my wife is my taxi service. And when I go to the doctor, I intentionally have her stay in the waiting room. And do you know why? Because they will talk to her. Do you know how frustrating that is? It's awful. So, anyway. So, key number 1 is assume that whatever patient you have with a developmental disability will be able to understand what you're going to communicate with them, even if they have to have some kind of supportive communication. So, here are some good tips again. Another tip slide, right? What is the first thing on my list there? Take some time, right? It takes some time. You need to find out from them or from their caregiver what's the best way to communicate with them. You need to use whatever method that is. You need to verify that you're actually communicating with them. And you need to take advantage of the supportive services that are available and consider getting a consult with a speech and language pathologist. Why with a speech language consult? Why would you get a consult from them? They're going to be able to assess the communication needs of that patient. What is their best method of communication? How are you going to be successful? They're an important member of this team, just like speech and language is an important member of the team if you're going to use the Passy-Muir valve. They're a part of the team. Include them in your communication with patients, particularly in these underserved patient groups. This is a helpful resource, the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. This is a link that gives you a lot of information on developmental disabilities and dealing with patients, in particular with developmental disabilities. So if you want to write this down, or you can take a picture of it, whatever, this is a great resource. So it's a good one to use. It gives you all kinds of help in finding assistive technologies and the like. Key number 2, talk directly to the patient, not to the caregiver, right? Have I said that before? I don't care whether you think the patient understands you or not. You have already found out how to communicate with them. You talk to them directly and assume that they can understand and make decisions. Even if a patient has a legal person who is responsible for helping them with their care decisions, you still are responsible for communicating directly with that patient. That patient still has the legal right to make the decisions for their health care and their life care decisions. So remember that. So, supportive decision making, that's an important concept, and that's something you need to think about, and we've talked kind of about that process if we're going along without using those words. Supportive decision making means that the person can make decisions if they are supported in giving ways of understanding the information you're giving to them and how it applies to them. Okay, that's what supportive decision making means, and that is a process particularly used here in the state of Tennessee. Decision making supports are the legal processes, forms, or less legal support services that are used to help that person understand. So those are the how-tos of how you communicate with a person who has a disability, who has a developmental disability. A conservator is what we were talking about. A conservator is a person who has been legally appointed as the person who helps make decisions for another person. Even though they've been appointed as the legal conservator, it doesn't mean that that conservator makes the decisions for them. That conservator is helping that person with a developmental disability understand so that they can make the decisions for themselves. So, do you understand that difference? And that's important. And this is another helpful resource. This is for the state of Tennessee. This deals with all this supportive decision making and dealing with and directly with healthcare and patients who have developmental disabilities, because this is a big effort in the state of Tennessee. So you should write this down or take a picture of it because it can be very helpful for you. Now, we've gone through a lot here. This is the list. This first 4 is kind of the respect part of the list. Always talk to the patient. Don't talk to someone in the room with them. Respect them. Assume that they can understand the information you're giving them. Don't assume that they can't. Well, maybe afterwards. If you want a story with me in the grocery store for the first time in my life, for the first time since my accident, shopping on my own, I'd be happy to talk to you, because it emphasizes what it's like to be treated as a real, honest-to-goodness human being who can be spoken to and who can really understand and really does have the capacity of making their own decisions. So remember that. Always find out what method of communication is best for them and use it, and speak directly to them. Assume that they can understand. And this is a little bit more about the how-tos. It's important to use the method of communication they prefer, to never use one method of communication only. Always use a couple methods, and always verify that the patient really understands. Particularly my experience with deaf people is that sometimes they will make you believe they do when they really do not. So you need to ask questions to verify that they specifically know what you said and that they can specifically take actions that they need to based on what you said. And always include the appropriate team members in your process. So I'm going to try this video, and I don't know, Jason, if you can make this video play for me, because this kind of is a humorous way of ending. Why do we want to communicate with people who have limitations? I know, it's up. I'm playing the very last video.
Space, might underline communication,
No.
safety, underline final, underline KK, underline 10.2023 dash protected, new dash
Do that
space.
again.
You thought I was a pain before? Now I can talk.
Holler that.
Uh-oh.
Holler again.
Nurse! Nurse!
There you go. That's why you want your patients to communicate. Thank you, and I appreciate being able to talk with you.